Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Pacific Crest Church. I'm Johnathan, and again, I am really glad that you are joining me again, that you're here. It's encouraging the conversations that I get from folks throughout the weeks as we have these conversations of listening and following Jesus's words. And I know there's a lot of things out there today, a lot of people navigating a spiritual path that really feels like when we look at things that are kind of commonly going on today, we look at the things that are in these ancient words of Jesus. Sometimes when we are navigating that path, it feels like we are unraveling, or the word today is deconstructing, previously held beliefs. And this journey, while it really is isolating, it's a courageous step, I think, towards a more authentic faith. And these discussions that we're having here are intended, and my hopes are, my goal is, to support that process, not by just trying to completely dismantle everything, but offer framework for reconstructing a way to rediscover and rebuild an understanding of Jesus and his core teachings that offer a fresh air and some breathing room to the conversation that moves us beyond religion to something that's more vibrant, a way of living. And in this act of reevaluating, I guess, is a step towards, I think, living life to the fullest. And so the places that we've been in these foundations are, the conversations are really important for us to discuss. And so we've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount. I would hope to have just sped through that. I think a lot of times we try to speed through things, but we're slowing down. And I want us to critically look at these red letters, these words that Jesus said. And so before we get started here in just a second, I just want to pray. Father, I thank you for the blessings you've poured out on us. And I pray again, your kingdom come, your will be done here as it is in heaven. And sometimes I look here and it doesn't look like heaven when there are people who are the minorities, those who are oppressed ethnic groups that are the strangers or considered strangers, who are immediately outcast as they're just trying to live life as people. Jesus, you came to give life more abundantly. You came and you saw people in spite of the labels that many of the religious leaders put on folks, like by calling them sinners or tax collectors or prostitutes and such. And may we not be people who label, may we be people who see humankind. And may we then love you, God, and love our neighbors. Be with us today as we just look through this conversation, as we talk through this conversation. Thank you for the grace that you give to us. May we give and afford that to others. In Jesus, I pray in your name. Amen. So this introduction today begins in this pivotal passage from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to look through 13 through 16. These are the words that are directly spoken by Jesus. Again, these are red letter words. These are depicting the words of Jesus, and I believe we really need to hone in on those things because sometimes what Jesus said doesn't look again like what it is going on today with those religious leaders. And so let's kind of work through that. So here Jesus speaks in Matthew chapter 5, 13 through 16, and I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition. And Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but it's thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and gives light to the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Oh boy. So these words follow the Beatitudes immediately, right? Where Jesus is saying, blessed are, and the characters of those kingdom things, the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, and the peacemakers. And Jesus is addressing not just a select few, not even just his closest disciples, but those who were gathered there, the extension of it, all those who chose to follow him, he's declaring them as kingdom people, rather than just merely instructing them on what they should become or do this, and then you can be that. The distinction is so crucial because it suggests that there's something big to this, that you are salt and light. You are the peacemakers. And if you're peacemakers, again, Jesus is including people that would have been excluded by religious leaders. The religious leaders, they were quick to say that we are the sons of Abraham. And Jesus, again, just as we looked at in the conversation of the Beatitudes, he was saying, if you're a peacemaker, you are a child of God. And that was huge. It was to say something like that, it really, I think, connects with where we are today, when there are many places that are religious establishments that would say you must behave, then you must believe, and then you can belong. And Jesus's way of what he's saying is that you belong. You are this, so that I think you can believe. And in that change, or those things come when we understand that identity of who we are. A behavior is created, one that, again, adds flavor to the things around us. And so we are children of God. We are salt. And so Jesus is not suggesting to these people who are listening to try to be salt and light. He's saying this definitively as a truth. This is your being. And he's declaring it as their identity. This is how you were originally made to be from the very beginning of all of creation. And this is super powerful. And I'm sad that there are so many times religious leaders create such walls that say, you are not. But Jesus is saying you are, especially for believers. And the idea of using the term salt of the earth, again, Jesus is really bringing something, I think, to those folks then versus I think it could happen for us today. It's just our idea of salt is a little bit different than maybe their idea of salt. We have a refined salt and it's in the shaker, and most of what it is that we think about salt is don't have too much. Like our doctor, as my doctor in my visit just long ago says, you should probably cut down on the salt. And I'm like, it tastes so good. But in the first century, it expanded a little bit more because salt was incredibly valuable and it had multi-purposes as a mineral. It just beyond just giving flavor, being some sort of something on the tabletop. In the ancient times, salt had value. And so what was salt used for? What were the people trying to think about? Well, salt was one, it was used for preservation. In a time without refrigeration or ice, salt was indispensable for preserving meat and other perishable foods, right? It kept things, prevented things from decay, and that was kind of its primary function. But it also offered flavor, right? Beyond the preservation, salt enhanced the taste of food and intensified the flavors for folks, so it made things more enjoyable, right? The other thing is it was used for purification and disinfectant. And just to say, like, hey, to pour salt on a wound, right? Well, to pour salt on a wound really had disinfectant capabilities, and it was really a component that was needed in ancient times. But it was also used again for cleansings and certain rituals. It was used also in ancient times as sort of a covenant of loyalty. The act of eating salt together symbolized a deep bond of friendship and loyalty. It was a salt covenant, and it was considered unbreakable, and it signified permanence. Salt also had a value. It had currency. Again, they would have traded this and it would have been great. The preserving, tasting, ritualistic, those things, Jesus is saying, you are those things. You were built to bring flavor to the world. You were meant to bring flavor to the world. You were made to preserve things. This is who you are. It's not do these things first and then you will be those. This was Jesus's really counter-cultural call. Delaying decay, creating thirst. Salt does that. It didn't talk about that. But when Jesus is, again, saying to be salt of the earth, he's assigning them, he is giving them charge as an active role in the world. He's saying you are agents of preservation. You are meant to delay moral decay and corruption in society. And then also, too, it was that religious stuff, that we're going to talk about that here in a second. But again, we know of sin, if it's left unchecked, the things that can really rot us to the core, we're called to help one another with that. And that's very important. I got to catch up on my notes here really quick. So, Eugene Peterson in the Message, the way he renders this, I love. He says, look, you are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. Healing wounds, salt does that, and it brings out flavor. So when it comes to the idea of what Jesus is doing, he's also saying, like, this brings about also a thirst. Like, we want something that's more. And are we, in our lives, bringing something that others want more of? Salt, again, in the ancient times just had a lot of different properties more than just the table stuff, salt baths and those different types of things. It was important. And when Jesus is saying, you are this, He is elevating them from the space of where many others were, again, labeling them, saying they are just sinners and they are A, B, C, D, and E of whatever that name. Jesus is saying, you are the flavors, the seasoning that brings about the fullness of the God flavoring here. And so Jesus then, he follows that really quickly up with this declaration, this warning. He says, but if a salt loses its taste, how can the saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but it's thrown out and it's trampled underfoot. Now, Jesus says if it loses its saltiness, and so the idea is he's probably, highly probably, referring to impurities or dilution to the salt, because salt does never, it never loses its saltiness. The only way that it can, and again, in those times as it was stored, is if impurities were to infiltrate that. And so he's saying, look, if this becomes contaminated or diluted, it will lose its effectiveness. So how can it lose it is, again, if you have a bunch of other stuff that is going into it. And I think Jesus is really addressing the religious leaders there at that time. He is also saying, look, if you're adding a bunch of things that were never intended to be there, it loses its power. It brings about impurities that affect even the whole taste, its ability to preserve food. It can. If it has more than what is intended to be the original, it just is not effective. And when it comes out, you can't separate all of that. It's too merged. So the only thing it's good for, Jesus says, is throwing that out. And this idea, this metaphor that Jesus is using is for these people who are gathered to be a better influence in the world, and to be careful not to bring about impurities that will allow you to lose the effectiveness due to that dilution. But again, Jesus is saying, you are salt. And I think that it's important to look around today and consider the warning and stay true really to the saltiness of Jesus's words, as opposed to being corrupted by other influences and what they do. There's just things out there today, storming the Capitol Christian type people who want to include a bunch of other things that were just never a part of what we're talking about here on the Sermon on the Mount. And so when individuals or communities compromise for their comfort or their convenience or their power, they're allowing these unsalty elements to dilute their faith, their testimony, their effectiveness. And that's a warning. Jesus is saying this then is only used to just throw out. It's useless. It can't be really restored. And this directly addresses a concern about what I think is the church today losing its edge and becoming too much like the world, and whatever it looks like in politics or in social media and those different types of things. And so really it's important to recall, like, what did early Christians do? What was the historical impact of what early Christians did? Well, early Christians established hospitals. They established orphanages. They did the things that Jesus said in Matthew 25, like, when you welcome the stranger, you are welcoming me. They took care of the sick and the abandoned. And this was really radical departure from what Rome was doing in their norms. Christians elevated the sanctity of human life. And that was really, again, in stark contrast with the Roman world. Their values contributed even to the rise of the middle class because it emphasized dignity and manual labor. And it was even, they were put in prison because of their way. Tertullian, observed outsider of Christianity, he says, hey, these guys energetically feed the poor, they bury them, they care for children who lacked property or parents, again, the orphans. They were attentive to aged slaves and prisoners. And again, their actions were recognized as love. And this historical impact demonstrates that Christian influence, Jesus's influence, is achieved through a counterculture of compassion rather than power or institutional control. And Jesus, again, was humble. He was a servant leader. His kingdom was not of this world. Rather, the pursuit of worldly powers really often associated with certain religious movements. And this is, again, counter to the salt in action. Corrie ten Boom and her family, she was a Christian in the Holocaust. She served a powerful example of being salt and light in the darkest hour by hiding Jewish people. and demonstrating self-sacrifice and love and unwavering faith in the face of immense cruelty, preserving human life and reflecting Christ's glory amongst the horrors of concentration camps. And she was in a concentration camp, and her sister would lose her life in the concentration camp, and she had to come to terms with forgiveness that could only be achieved through Jesus. Shane Claiborne is another activist who's currently today standing in the gap for life and for those who are the marginals and minority groups and even ethnic groups and even those who deserve life. When one side will say life exists at certain points, but they're easy to go put someone on death row and take their life. And Shane Claiborne, again, he's doing things that are radical, being flavor and bringing light into this world. And so in our daily life, in our workplace, in our neighborhood, online interactions, there really is a call to be a preserving agent, slowing down decay and being a flavoring, the God flavors, right? In a situation that feels bland or bitter. So then Jesus also says, now you are the light of the world. And the light meaning also, again, it's like this divine presence, this truth, just like with salt. Light image carried immense symbolic understanding with ancient people, deeply rooted in their understanding with God and creation. In the beginning was light, right? The historical context that light is a revelation, it's guidance. In ancient times, it wasn't just for seeing, it was a symbol for knowledge. It was a symbol for truth, guidance, and God's presence. And lamps provided protection from danger, illuminated a path. The beacon was visible for miles, right? It would offer a guide to travelers who were coming to Jerusalem. It's the Jerusalem city of lights and light to the nations. And a misconception is that light as judgment or self-promotion, it's a misinterpretation. Jesus says, let your light shine. And it's not about showcasing our religion, our righteousness, or judging others in darkness, or being in some sort of dogmatic Christian circles. Their radical goal is to make themselves look higher or better, but it's to be light, not because we're better, but to offer safety or a place for people to gather and know that there is something that is good there, something protecting there. And so we have a big lighted cross on our hill, and there's a lot of conversation about that. And I think that light, that city on a hill, is what it's supposed to represent. But it just sometimes just tends to be just a cross on a hill. And Jesus is saying, it's not about a light on that hill, it's about us being a light. And this is the Sermon on the Mount. And N.T. Wright, an author who talks about the Sermon on the Mount, he includes a lot of these things, and he talks about what it is. It's this abstract moral code that's more radical alternative of living that Jesus is inaugurating, about being a new kind of community that lives out God's kingdom and values in such a way that it becomes visible, attractive, and an alternative to the world's ways. And again, when Jesus says that bushel basket, it wasn't something that was just used for measuring. Like, people would know, nobody lights a lamp and hides it under something that was meant to hold grain. They're two different things. And that would be utterly ridiculous, self-defeating. And the point, again, is not to dim, it's to be visible, to serve, to be this divine presence of light linked to the very act of creation and the very beginning of God's creation. Let there be light. And so Jesus is saying, you are light, not you can be light if ... if you A, B, C, D, or E. Jesus is bringing something of goodness and truth that lights universally symbolizes, that it's positive and that you are that. You are beauty, you are wisdom, you have redemption, justice, peace. Again, life itself. And darkness consistently is associated with everything that is not God: wickedness, judgment, and death. And God's instruction in the Torah, again, he was saying he is a light for Israel. That light provides guidance. It dispels confusion. And really, Jesus is the ultimate light. And the New Testament really brings this rich symbolism together of the person of Jesus, who is and declares that I am the light of the world. He is the flesh of the Word, and he is the light that enlightens all people. And in the Jewish context in that time, light in Torah was very significant. They would have got that. And so the suggestion is Christianity is light. It wasn't, again, just a moral goodness. It was a revelation of God's truth and wisdom that came to live out an experience. That means for Jesus' followers that you are to live this out. And the author C.S. Lewis gives this rich I think, this powerful meaning and this framework for spiritual reconstruction by saying that the divine revelation of God and that light helps people see things through the lens of Christ, allows us to see more clearly. And so when we think of light, light is good. And so Jesus, again, here, he's trying to say, this is who you are. And what Jesus is doing is providing a clear and compelling mandate for the followers who are gathered there. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. And people don't hide their light or put it in a basket or they put it on a lampstand and it gives light to the whole house. Are you a light on a lampstand? I mean, there was a time where there's a song, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." And hide it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine. And this, for the followers of Jesus, he's trying to say, don't hide your light, shine. And the thing that Brennan Manning said, that the things that the unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable is that there are Christians who show up on Sunday and act this way, but on Monday they have nothing to do with being the light of Jesus. And this is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. And so that light, again, we're being called to pierce through the darkness, shine out with good works, practice this outward work and these actions that Jesus explicitly states in Matthew 25 of shining light, right? Feed the hungry, visit those in prison, welcome the stranger. I was sick and you visited me. And again, disciples would say, when did we ever see that, Jesus? And he's like, if you ever did this for anyone, then you did it for me. And so Jesus bringing in this idea of salt and light, this is the Sermon on the Mount. We started with the Beatitudes of what Jesus was saying. He says this, and then he's about to launch into this pretty specific thing about following the law, following the religious leaders and ideas. And then you're almost left to the point as to then who could do this? And the whole idea is what Jesus is doing is he's really trying to give a paradigm shift, illuminating contrast of what is going to be his ways versus the ideologies of those who were the religious leaders. He's about to build up a framework of these ethical actions that are rooted in humility and a divine purpose rather than human ego or institutional self-preservation, really addressing a common point of disillusionment. And so, we really have been looking at this story of what Jesus is prepping, of which next time we will look at the external rules. But Jesus, I think, is setting the stage that he is desiring heart over the external rules. So Jesus' approach to the law really is revolutionary, especially in how it differed from the religious leaders of those times. And the Pharisees were stereotyped as really the hypocrites. The Pharisees seemed to be very devout. They were widely respected in a lot of places. They genuinely believed that the law should be applied in all aspects of life. And they adhered to an oral law, which supplemented the written law of the Torah. And Josephus, a first century historian and Pharisee himself, noted that the harmonious community and relations of the virtuous lives that Jesus challenged the approach was profound. And he frequently used this formula. Jesus would often say, "You have heard that it was said, but I tell you." And this wasn't an attempt for him to abolish the law, like we're going to talk about in just a few weeks. But his claim was something that was going to be greater than that of the scribes. Jesus was moving beyond the external acts of murder again, and then he was also really trying to get to the point of the condition of the heart. You shall not murder, but Jesus is saying, I'm telling you, if you're angry with your brother or your sister, you'll be subject to judgment. Emphasizing that God sees through this external experience and perceives the heart. And so looking at, again, what the religious leaders are really trying to impose on people, these people are coming in hearing Jesus, and they are being welcomed into a space that they just were not allowed. And Jesus's critique of this really is, it confronts this tradition, this thing that would invalidate, I think people would think it invalidated God's commands, but Jesus, again, he was really trying to focus on what sometimes people do on the outside is not what they do on the inside, like what we shared about a couple weeks ago, the whitewashed tombs. They were looking good on the outside, but inside they're dead bones. And so Jesus is emphasizing the heart of transformation. It's the purity of motive and the spirit of the law over its letter. and that true righteousness according to Jesus surpasses mere external observance. It's about heart and dedication to God, loving as he loved, turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, and forgiving others. And Jesus's critique of the respected Pharisaic tradition, it offers a timeless model for discerning authentic heart-centered faith from religious legalism and institutional hypocrisy. And for individuals that are undergoing this deconstruction, this is a really common point, this disillusionment that was perceived through the hypocrisy of rigid religious institutions. By demonstrating that Jesus himself challenged these, we can challenge those religious norms today, emphasizing a purity of heart over the spirit of the law and discussing what validates the listener's own critical questions about religious forms and authentic faith taught by Jesus, not by just some sort of blind human tradition, external rules that don't really bring about transformation. And questioning this in our faith, it's really getting about listening to Jesus and really, again, breaking it down to more authentic faith. And so I think this helps with community building. It helps against this isolation. And I think studies constantly show that humans thrive in community. This is what church can be good for. This is why I try not to leave, to stop being a Christian, because if I did, it would leave it in the hands of those that are just trying to bring about more rules and regulations, keeping people out as opposed to people keeping in. And Brennan Manning, he often spoke about when he was saying this, it's like, this is a scandalous grace. It's authentic community challenged by the masks that we wear in religious settings. He and others, like St. Francis, they were really trying to point to a spirituality that's rooted in relationship with God and others with a created world. And this isn't about an exclusive club. It's about creating space for genuine connection where people can find belonging and purpose. And so I think this challenges modern ideologies. The Christian nationalism and the ideologies that are very dangerous, they intertwine in sometimes religious beliefs. And these movements create division, defining who is in and who's out based on markers such as their ethnic, religious, patriotism, gender, their race. It carries the risk of politicizing religion. I've heard people say that current administration is the most godly they've ever seen. And again, this is counter to the thing that Jesus is trying to talk about of being salt and light. When we are doing this, we're bringing in these external things that are not a part of the salt. So to restore or reconstruct this humanity, Jesus is trying to proclaim that God's reign is fundamentally about healing all those divisions which keeps humankind in conflict. And this vision directly opposes divisiveness that is really inherent in the nationalism ideology and that promotes even a racial hierarchy or whatever. Nonviolent God of love, right, is at the heart of this. And God is committed to nonviolence, I believe, and to move beyond religion. God's reign is not about merely elevating one denomination or religion above the other. It really is encompassing a broader perspective, saying that there's more to life than this. It's that God's saying that creation is good and God is transforming communities, and the churches that we have, they exist for God's mission, not mission. The church God has a mission, and the mission has a church, is what I'm trying to say. This is a contrast between what, again, Jesus is teaching to this restored humanity versus the things that are going along with the religious groups and those types of people who were demonstrating not being the salt and not being the light. They were not being inclusive to peacemakers, being children of God. They were excluding them. And that's, I think, a contrast again with looking at what Jesus is talking about to even our current day conversations of politics and those types of things. Richard Rohr, who is a author and monk, speaks about how Christianity truly, and I do believe this, Christianity operates best in its resistance position, not one that's in control. And he points out that whenever the church has sought to be in control, it has often become the most corrupt. And so Jesus is calling us to be salt, not the main course, not the government body, but the humble, the giving purpose and meaning to prevent decay. And this challenge this human desire for power and dominance that we see in so many religious systems throughout history, including some today. This provides the framework for the listeners like you and I and those there to understand how faith had called them to engage in current political and social issues in the way that aligns with Jesus's radical love rather than the harmful modern movements of power. And being salt and light transforms and engages rather than aligning with worldly power. And I do think that even the shining as a light, being salt in the contemporary world, is actively addressing darkness of those who are the minority, marginalized, and the injustice that's going on. And not merely just this historical concept, but this present day reality where there are 500,000 currently at this time legal immigrants who now have become in the position to be deported, even though they've said we've done everything, we're legal, and we're trying to find citizenship here, have now been deemed illegal and can immediately be arrested and deported back to a country that they might not have ever even been to. And looking at, again, what Jesus is saying is like, there is not one person you've connected eyes with that God does not love. How about that? And this is how believers live as salt and light in a divided world, actively engaging with intention and mercy and grace. And every person you meet is worthy of love and compassion, just as you are. And so connecting with salt and light, to be specific, it's connecting with a marginalized group of folks. And that includes, again, in this time in this month, it is June. And this is a time where a lot of folks will recognize the LGBTQ population in Pride Month. And I have already heard, it's the first day, people who are becoming vicious about that and speaking, I think, in ways that are labeling as opposed to inviting. They're not being light. They're not being salt. They're bringing things in, trying to muck up the situation where, again, we are not looking at people, we're looking at titles. And I think Jesus is really trying to push against that. He's really trying to, again, bring about this understanding of a bigger community that seeks compassion, compassionate faith, reconstruction. So my question is, where in your community or my community or in the broader world do you see darkness that needs illumination? And what specific good works can be engaged in the world that reflects God's light or God's flavors, right, in the prevailing narrative of division or the marginalized people? So I think, the challenge is we're called to be, not just believe, to be transformed community. And so Jesus's declaration is, you're salt, you're light. This is your identity. This is your purpose. This is action. It's not just saying that you can just repeat the words. It really is, again, it's just not talking about the salt. It's not just talking about the light. It's talking about a personal transformation, an inner shift of saltiness and light that comes from an internal shift in character and development. And this is about living out the greatest commands: to love God and to love people, to love yourself, which is to embody Micah chapter 6, verse 8, to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. This is the inner work that makes our presence impactful. And so again, when we're exploring love, we might want to look again at these English words for love. It's broad, but there are 4 words in the Greek language that define the word love. And the words, they range from all different types, but the word of God is to always act in the best interest of the object love. And if we're to love our neighbor, are we always acting in the best interest of them, or are we just trying to only act in our best interest, what makes me feel good, what protects my walls? Or even we spoke about the statement of a recent politics saying there is an order of love and to put these things first before you put other things. That goes, again, counter what Jesus is talking about. It's always acting in the best interest of love, to love God and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And this is not about building exclusive clubs. It's about creating a space of genuine connection where people can find belonging and purpose. A powerful example of community and rebuilding comes when somebody can even love their enemy, when someone can even do something against you and you can still respond with a way to heal and to redeem and restore. I get students here who at Pybus Market who want to come in and do some community service, and I meet them and I'm like, I don't care what it was that you've done. My goal is to give you the opportunity to serve your time in community hours, and I hope that I can be a good reference or voice for you when you go further. And that happened recently. A young man called me back and sought a reference from me because he's now moving on into an apprenticeship. And I'm like, that's fantastic. It's not saying you're labeled and you're outcast and here's your punishment. It's like, how can we restore people to the best that they were intended to be from the very beginning? And this, I think, should be and can be attractive to a world, not through rigid religious dogmas or exclusionary practices, but through love and kindness and hope, justice, humility, and things that bring about the welcoming light and the flavor that helps people live well and better, to love themselves, to love their neighbor, to love God. And so with that, this is not just these sayings. Again, if that's who you are, this is a call to action. And this is your identity, and it's my identity. It's our mission, salt and light, to explore this Sermon on the Mount and this declaration from Jesus. Again, there's not these hoops that we have to jump through. It is what we are. Salt believers are called to be agents of preservation. You're called to slow decay. You're called to bring the God flavors in a world that often feels tasteless and corrupt. As light, you're called to illuminate truth, to expose darkness, and to reflect God's colors. And this is not for personal glory, but so that others may see and give glory to God in heaven. And this is a costly, grace. It is not something that's being done in a lot of places, but it does go counter to some of the ideologies and the religious rhetoric that is happening. But I think we have a place to put this into practice and to be watching and listening. I think we're salt. I think we're light. And I think, again, this is not for future aspirations. They're present in our reality right now, right here, to add flavor. This isn't about being perfect. It's not about being religious. It's about working with people in desperate times who need things, people who are ready to be shaped by the radical love of Jesus. And so this week, I want to challenge you to consider an area in your life where you feel like you might be hiding light or putting it under a bushel. And it could be a talent that you're not using. It could be kindness that you're holding back to someone. It could be an opinion that you're afraid to share. I mean, anything. It's looking truly to find something to uncover, to expose light to this week and see how this impacts the space in your world, the little corner of your world. And maybe it's a conversation with someone, maybe it's an act of service, or simply just showing up and being authentic in the place where you felt like you maybe had to conform. And I don't think it's easy, but I think it's possible. I don't think it happens overnight, but I think we can start. Maybe we've got some saltiness that's been diluted with something and we need to throw it out because it needs to be trampled. And so I guess what we need is to find that true source of saltiness and then replenish our cups again and look at people the way that God looks at them and see them, to have compassion on people who are helpless and harassed, people who are, as Jesus said, like sheep with no shepherd. And as we close today, I've got a couple things. I want to share with you a song. I am not a musician. I've written a couple songs, but I put some words down and wrote out some lyrics to song Salt and Light. And I did use this great program that helps turn my words into music. And so I want to play that at the end. It's going to kind of be the closing of this message. And you can listen to the words or not. You can listen to the song or not. That's fine. But I've been listening to it and just talking about the change that we can be, right? That we can be this light. And it just takes a spark to light a fire. I do believe we can be that spark. I believe that you can be that spark in spite of the things that are going on in the world around us, where it seems like there are more who want to oppress people than bring flavor and light to people. My prayer is that you would go out, not really striving for perfection, but simply being. You are a human being, not a human doing. And so I hope that you discover the profound, the quiet power of your presence as salt and light, and that the taste of grace will linger in your mouth, in your on your tongue. The warmth of that your love would fill your heart, and that you would walk in a world as a beacon, a flavor for the good of every human around you. So go and shine, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Giving flavor to its worth. If salt loses what it's made to do, what else can it be turned into? We shine bright for all to see, a city glowing on the hill free. No shadows fall when lights alive. Through us the love of truth will thrive. Don't hide the lamp, it's meant to glow, a beacon for the world to know. The smallest flame can ignite change. Darkness flees where brightness takes its range. We shine bright for all to see, a city glowing on the hill free. No borders hold this radiant fire. It lifts each heart, lifts spirits So let your deeds reflect the grace that others see in your embrace. Through every act, through every word, a holy melody